Gaudeamus omnes in Domino, diem festum celebrantes, sub honore sanctorum omnium.
Welcome to The Way of the Fathers, a podcast sponsored by CatholicCulture.org. I'm your host, Mike Aquilina. Well, we've made it to the last episode of our second series. Today, we consider the Second Council of Nicaea. Image is everything, or so the saying goes. And it's true that this last of the 7 classic ecumenical councils was all about images. There are good reasons for that. Images are important to the Christian faith. We might say they're essential to the orthodox doctrine of Jesus Christ. Jesus is, according to St. Paul, the image, the icon of the invisible God. And mankind since Adam has been created in the image and likeness of God. We are, moreover, predestined to be conformed to the image of the Son of God. God makes images and communicates through images. He saves the world through the image of his eternal word. Thus, Christians have always made devotional images in imitation of God. The earliest artifacts are symbols drawn on manuscripts of the Bible. But from the same time period, the archaeological record preserves rings and vessels and wall paintings that bear images of the apostles, the Virgin Mary, and Old Testament figures such as Noah, Abraham, and Moses. Even today, when filmmakers want us to recognize something as Catholic, what do they show us? The camera focuses on a crucifix hanging above an altar, or we see a bank of stained glass depicting the faces of the saints, or we see ordinary people lighting candles before a statue of the Virgin Mary. Images inspire devotion for the persons they represent. They arouse powerful religious sentiments. I remember the news reports from May 1972, when a mentally disturbed man took a hammer to Michelangelo's famous Pietà. He hit it 15 times, removing half of Mary's arm and part of her nose and eyelids. I was a small child and didn't understand what had happened, but I could see that my parents were deeply upset. They were deeply moved. They knew the Pietà only through pictures, images of an image. But through that masterpiece, they had come to know something of Jesus, something of Mary, and they grieved at the desecration. Imagine such sacrilege multiplied by 1,000, and then 10,000. Imagine a madman directing his army to destroy not just one beloved sacred image, but all of them. Every single painting, mosaic, sculpture, and tapestry, every piece of religious jewelry, every decorative image on the furnishings in every church and chapel in half the known world. If you can picture that, you can imagine the crisis the church faced for more than half of the 8th century. The century began in the midst of the so-called 20 Years' Anarchy, 2 decades marked by civil unrest in the East and a rapid succession of emperors in Constantinople. None of them lasted long. Most of them died horribly. All the while, the eastern territories continued to fall to the Arab Muslims, who intermittently came to lay siege to the capital city. The chaos came to an end in 717 with the rise of Leo III. He was known as Leo the Isaurian because of the region in Syria where he was from. Leo was a shrewd warrior and an able administrator, and so he brought to end the decades of instability. He turned back the Arab forces surrounding Constantinople and managed to keep them at a distance throughout his long reign. Once he had achieved a measure of peace, Leo, like so many of his imperial predecessors, turned his attention from military movements, which were his true expertise, to theology and doctrine. There was at the time a small movement among a few Eastern bishops to moderate or even eliminate the use of images in churches. They may have been responding to the critique from Muslim neighbors. From early on, Islam, in most of its forms, forbade the use not only of devotional images, but of any representational art. This prohibition was characteristic of other religions that were active in the East. Manichaeans believed that the material world was fashioned as a prison for spirits, and so they had little use for the artistic depiction of matter, such as human faces and bodies. And though some Jews decorated their synagogues with painted scenes from the scriptures, others considered images to be unlawful, citing Exodus chapter 20. There, in the midst of the 10 Commandments, God tells the Israelites, "You shall not make for yourself a graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water underneath the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the 3rd and the 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments." We don't know for sure where Leo the Isaurian got his new ideas, but he got a severe case of them. In 726, he ordered the removal of a beloved image of Jesus Christ that hung at the main gate of the imperial palace. There was immediately a riot, and a mob killed several members of the crew sent to take down the icon. Leo was unmoved. He replaced the portrait of the Savior with a simple cross, and he continued his demolition derby. In 730, he issued an edict forbidding the use of any sacred images. The Patriarch of Constantinople, named Germanus, would not cooperate with Leo's programs, and so he disappeared from office. Leo replaced him with the Patriarch who shared his beliefs. They became known as Iconoclasts, which means picture smashers. In Rome, the Pope, Gregory III, received news of the happenings in Constantinople and openly disapproved. He summoned 2 synods, both of which confirmed that iconoclasm was contrary to Christian tradition. In retaliation, Leo invaded Sicily and confiscated the papal estates there, which were important resources for feeding the poor in Rome. Pope Gregory excommunicated the Church of Constantinople and its subordinate churches. But Leo pressed on with his program, pursuing it through a long reign, till his death in 741. And his program didn't end with his death. What was an interest for Leo became a passion for his son and heir, Constantine V. Constantine fancied himself a deep religious thinker, and he applied himself to the task of working out a theology to justify his father's program of iconoclasm. It is one of history's greatest recorded attempts to square the circle. Constantine began by insisting that he accepted the canons of all the ecumenical councils. But then he proceeded to dismantle the liturgical tradition observed by all the fathers of all those councils. He began with the simple opposition to the devotional use of icons. But following the logic forward, he soon found himself condemning any honor paid to the saints. He rejected their invocation and intercession as well. And then he began to desecrate their relics, ordering the bodies of some saints to be removed from their tombs in churches and thrown into the sea. In doing this, he was reviving the heresies of Helvidius and Vigilantius, which Jerome had demolished some centuries before. He either didn't know this or didn't care. His hatred of icons required the desecration of every church in his realm. His demotion of the saints made necessary an overhaul of the liturgy and sacred calendar. And as if that wasn't enough, Constantine then went searching for a Christological reason why such a radical program was necessary. As he did this, he managed to borrow terminology from many of the heresies of the past, even those that opposed and contradicted each other. He used the language of both Nestorians and Monophysites. His program for religious reform was ambitious and radical, and utterly incoherent with tradition. He imposed it with a heavy hand, using the full force of his military as images were torn from churches and homes. Many pious believers died or were maimed rather than yield their icons. soldiers simply hacked off the hands that would not loosen their grip. He also met widespread opposition from the monasteries. His response was to expel the monks and have their property turned into hotels. Then he issued decrees condemning celibacy as well. His people despised him for all this, and they gave him the nickname that has stayed with him through history. He was known, and remains known, as Constantine Copronymus. Translated politely, it means Constantine, whose name is excrement. The sense might be better rendered as Constantine Poopyhead. More significantly, he drew theological fire from one of the great minds of his time, the Syrian monk John of Damascus. John's arguments against iconoclasm were many, and they were irrefutable. Constantine knew that his broad program would not proceed by way of persuasion, and he knew that he needed broader support within the church's hierarchy. He knew enough history, furthermore, to know that emperors can accomplish a lot by summoning bishops to a council and then bullying them while they're sequestered. So in 754, he commanded the bishops of the East to appear in Hieria, a suburb of Constantinople. More than 300 bishops showed up, but not a single one of the church's patriarchs. For this reason, the Council of Hieria is sometimes mocked as the Headless Council. The bishops quickly approved all the items on Constantine's agenda, and they did him the favor of proclaiming their synod to be the Seventh Ecumenical Council. But it was a sham, and everyone knew it. The Pope in Rome considered Constantinople still to be under the ban of excommunication, and the other patriarchs refused to dignify the gathering with their presence. Constantine didn't care. He had all he wanted to take his program forward. He reigned for another 21 years, brutally imposing his religion on a populace that hated him. He was, nonetheless, an effective administrator and commander after the fashion of his father. Constantine died in 775 and was succeeded by his son Leo IV, who faced immediate military challenges that required all his attention. He showed some interest in undoing the damage his father had done, but he never had a chance. He died of tuberculosis in 780, leaving the crown to his 9-year-old son. Leo's widow, Irene, would rule in the name of her son until he came of age. And she is the hero of the story. Irene contacted the Pope and expressed her desire to summon a council to settle the controversy regarding the status of images. The Pope, Adrian I, accepted the overtures and prepared a delegation of representatives. So the council convened in Constantinople in 786. But things didn't proceed according to Irene's plans. A group of imperial soldiers went rogue and entered the church where the bishops had assembled. They disrupted the session, and the bishops scattered. Irene's response was swift. She had the oppositional guards disarmed and discharged from military service. Then she moved the council to the suburb of Nicaea, where it proceeded peacefully. The bishops rejected the Headless Council, the mock synod of Hieria, and they threw out its canons root and branch. The language of their condemnation was so strong that the British historian Philip Hughes politely declined to translate it. After the example of Pope Leo the Great, Pope Adrian sent a doctrinal letter to be read aloud to the Council Fathers. At the end, they shouted their agreement. And so the Council proclaimed the return of images in triumphal terms. As the sacred and life-giving cross is everywhere set up as a symbol, so also should the images of Jesus Christ, the Virgin Mary, the holy angels, as well as those of the saints and other pious and holy men, be embodied in the manufacture of sacred vessels, tapestries, vestments, and so on, and exhibited on the walls of churches, in the homes, and in all conspicuous places, by the roadside and everywhere, to be revered by all who might see them. For the more they are contemplated, the more they move to fervent memory of their prototypes. Therefore, it is proper to accord them a fervent and reverent adoration, not, however, the veritable worship which, according to our faith, belongs to the divine being alone. For the honor accorded to the image passes over to its prototype, and whoever adores the image adores in it the reality of what is there represented. Second Nicaea made necessary distinctions, drawing from the work of John of Damascus. On the one hand was the worship of adoration, latreia. This was due to God alone. On the other hand was the honor of veneration that was due to certain persons, the saints and angels, one's parents, and the authorities in government. When Christians pay homage before an image, they are not worshiping the image for itself. They are honoring the person the image represents. This was to be the faith of the church and then the law of the land. Churches and homes would once again be decorated with icons. But the damage had been done. Over the half-century of iconoclasm, almost all the artistic heritage of the Christian East had been destroyed. And the council was not quite the end of the story. Irene presided over the restoration of icons in the church's life. But when her son came of age, he reverted to the heresy of his grandfather. Irene took part in a conspiracy to unseat him, and she succeeded. After a reign of 5 years, he was abducted and blinded, and probably killed. It had all the elements of a Greek tragedy, but today it is recognized as the Seventh Ecumenical Council, the last to be accepted by both East and West in an undivided church. I hope you've enjoyed our romp through the councils in Season 2. If you did, you needn't be sad because this is the last episode. We'll still be podcasting patristics for you. In these months between seasons, we'll enjoy the freedom we have apart from a series. We can explore a different theme in every episode during the intermission, and we can range widely. What holds it all together is our interest in the Fathers. I hope you'll join us every time, and I ask you to please consider making a donation. We're entirely listener-funded. Just visit us at catholicculture.org/donate/audio and let us know that you love the Fathers. We're grateful for anything you can give.
De quorum solemnitate gaudent angeli et collaudant filium Dei.
Way of the Fathers is just one of the podcasts produced by CatholicCulture.org. To hear more from the Church Fathers in their own words, check out Catholic Culture audiobooks, readings of Catholic classics, including the Fathers and St. John Henry Newman. You might also enjoy Criteria, the Catholic film podcast, devoted to works of high artistic caliber and Catholic interest. And for interviews on a wide range of topics in Catholic arts and culture, listen to the Catholic Culture podcast.